Take two patios. Same size, same sunlight, same containers, same budget. Now look at them in midsummer. One is overflowing with color, layers of blooms, balanced height, plants that look settled, established, almost effortless. The other? Sparse, uneven, a few flowers here and there, gaps where soil shows through, plants that look like they're still trying to figure out where they belong. Same setup, same gardener, one difference: timing. The gardener with the full, vibrant patio planted in April. The other waited. And that single decision, those few weeks, completely changed the outcome. Because April isn't just early in the season, it's the moment when perennials decide how they're going to perform for the rest of the year. Cool soil, consistent moisture, lower stress. That's when roots expand aggressively. That's when plants build the foundation that everything else depends on. Miss that window, and you spend the entire season catching up. Use it, and the rest of the season feels easy. So in this countdown, we're going through 13 perennials that take advantage of that April window better than anything else you can plant in containers. We're starting at number 13 and building all the way to number 1, the single most powerful perennial you can plant in April for non-stop patio color. Before we start, take a second and think about your containers right now. Are they filled or are they waiting? Drop a comment and tell me which plant you're planning to use this season. Let's get into it. Number 13, Dianthus. This is where most people underestimate the impact of temperature. Dianthus thrives in cool conditions. It doesn't tolerate them, it prefers them, which means April gives it something June never will: control. When planted in cool soil, Dianthus grows tighter, lower, more compact. More buds form per stem. More flowers appear at once. The result is a dense, almost cushion-like mound of blooms that feels intentional instead of stretched or leggy. Plant it later in warmer soil and everything changes. Growth becomes loose, stems elongate, flower production drops. Same plant, different timing. And that's the pattern you're going to see again and again. Dianthus also brings something else most container plants don't emphasize enough: fragrance. Not light, not subtle, but noticeable. A clove-like scent that builds as the plant fills out, especially in warm evenings when the patio is actually being used. Place it near seating areas, edges of containers, or anywhere you want that sensory layer to matter, because color draws attention, but fragrance keeps people there. Number 12, Agastache. Now we move from compact to vertical energy. Agastache is built for summer: heat, dryness, long bloom periods. But here's the detail that matters. It only performs that way if it establishes first. An establishment happens in April. In cool soil, Agastache builds a strong root crown. That crown determines how many flowering spikes the plant can produce later. More root development now means more blooms later. It's that simple. If you wait until June, the plant is forced to split its energy, trying to grow roots while also dealing with heat. The result? Fewer spikes, shorter bloom period, less overall impact. But planted in April, Agastache does the opposite. It prepares first, then performs. And when it does, it becomes one of the most active plants in your entire patio setup. Pollinators don't visit occasionally, they stay. Bees, butterflies, constant movement from morning to evening. So you're not just adding color, you're adding life. Number 11, Veronica. Now we introduce structure, because a container without vertical definition often feels flat no matter how many flowers you add. Veronica solves that with precision: upright flower spikes, clean lines, defined height, and again, timing changes everything. Veronica builds its flowering crown in cool soil. That crown is what produces the spikes. More crown development in April equals more spikes in summer. And not just more, stronger, more upright, more evenly spaced, which is what creates that structured look people associate with professionally designed containers. It doesn't sprawl, it doesn't collapse, it holds its shape. And that reliability is what makes it so valuable, because once it's in place, it anchors everything around it. Number 10, Blanket Flower. Now we shift into intensity, because blanket flower doesn't blend, it stands out. Bright reds, oranges, yellows, colors that don't fade into the background. They define the space. But what makes it powerful isn't just the color, it's endurance. and endurance comes from roots. Blanket flower develops a taproot, and that taproot forms best in cool April soil. That's what allows it to handle the drying cycles of containers in summer. Without it, the plant struggles. With it, the plant thrives. So when you plant in April, you're not just improving bloom, you're increasing resilience, less stress, more consistency, longer performance. And in containers where conditions change quickly, that resilience is everything. Number 9. Japanese painted fern. Now we move away from flowers for a moment, because color doesn't only come from blooms. Japanese painted fern brings color through foliage. Silver, green, hints of burgundy, and in shaded patios, this matters even more, because flowers can be limited, but texture isn't. April is when new fronds begin to emerge, and the way they develop in those early weeks determines how they look for the entire season. Cool conditions allow them to expand fully, to reach their true size, to display their full coloration. Plant later, and heat compresses that process. Fronds stay smaller, color dulls. The plant still grows, but it never reaches the same level of visual impact. So this is not about survival, it's about quality, and that difference becomes obvious by midsummer. Number 8. Gora. Now we introduce movement, because not every plant should be dense. Not every plant should be static. Gora creates motion. Thin stems, light blooms, flowers that shift and sway even in the slightest breeze. And that movement changes how a container feels. It softens everything, breaks up rigid shapes, adds rhythm. But like blanket flower, Gora depends on a taproot, and that taproot needs time. April gives it that time. Weeks of cool soil to grow downward before the plant focuses on upward growth. And once established, Gora becomes one of the most low-maintenance plants you can use. It doesn't demand constant watering. It doesn't collapse in heat. It continues, steady, light, continuous. And that consistency is what makes it so effective in mixed containers. It balances everything else. Now pause for a second, because you might be noticing a pattern. Every plant so far benefits from the same thing. Not fertilizer, not extra care, timing. Cool soil, root development first, performance second. And that's the difference between containers that look planted and containers that look finished. Part 2 is where the list starts to shift, because the next plants don't just perform well, they define the entire container. They're the ones people notice first, and the ones that carry the display through the hardest part of the season. Part 2 begins where most patios either come together or fall apart. Because up to this point, you've been building the foundation: compact bloomers, early structure, movement, texture. But now, everything shifts toward dominance. These are the plants that don't just support a container, they define it. They carry color through heat, hold their shape when others fade, and create the kind of presence that makes a patio feel full instead of temporary. And once again, the difference isn't just the plant, it's when the plant goes in. Number 7. Russian sage. This is where containers start to feel intentional instead of decorative. Russian sage doesn't behave like a typical flowering plant. It doesn't form a tight mound. It doesn't stay compact. It opens, expands, creates a cloud of color rather than a block. Silvery stems, soft lavender blue blooms, a haze of texture that sits above the container rather than inside it. And that's what makes it so powerful. It changes the silhouette. Now here's what matters. Russian sage is built for harsh conditions: heat, dry soil, full sun. But it only handles those conditions if the root system is ready. And that preparation happens in April. Cool soil allows the plant to establish its woody base and begin extending its root network before summer stress arrives. Without that early window, the plant struggles to stabilize. Growth becomes weak, stems flop, the cloud effect disappears. But when planted in April, everything tightens, stems hold, color builds gradually, and by midsummer, it becomes one of the most visually dominant plants in your entire container setup. Number 6. Penstemon. Now we move into precision again, but with more energy. Penstemon brings vertical spikes like Veronica, but with more intensity, stronger colors, deeper tones, more attraction for pollinators. But its performance is tied directly to how well it establishes. Penstemon builds a fibrous root system that spreads outward quickly in cool soil. That spread is what supports its upright growth later. And if that system is incomplete when heat arrives, the plant never fully recovers its momentum. That's why April matters. It gives penstemon time to expand underground before it's asked to perform above ground. And when that happens, the results are immediate. Stronger stems, more spikes, longer bloom duration. And something else you'll notice: consistency. Because once established properly, penstemon doesn't fluctuate. It doesn't give you one strong flush and then fade. It holds. And that stability is what makes it so valuable in containers. Number 5, creeping phlox. Now we shift back to coverage, because one of the biggest visual problems in containers isn't a lack of flowers, it's exposed soil, empty surface, gaps that break the illusion of fullness. Creeping phlox solves that directly. It spreads low, moves outward, and covers the container surface quickly. But here's what makes April planting so important. This plant expands most aggressively in cool conditions. Not warm, not hot, cool. That's when its stems extend and anchor, filling space before flowering begins. So by the time blooms arrive, the plant already looks established, already looks complete. And that creates a very specific effect. Instead of flowers appearing on top of soil, they appear on top of foliage. A full carpet, a continuous layer. That's what makes containers look finished. Not just blooming, but filled. And creeping phlox gives you that early. Number 4, hardy geranium. This is where flexibility enters the system, because not every patio has perfect conditions. Some areas get full sun, others get partial shade, and most plants prefer one or the other. Hardy geranium doesn't demand that choice. It adapts. But its real strength isn't just adaptability, it's persistence. This is one of the longest performing perennials you can put in a container, and that performance is tied to root spread. In April, hardy geranium sends its roots outward through the container, building a wide base instead of a deep one. That wide base allows it to absorb moisture efficiently, which means better drought tolerance later, better stability, more consistent flowering. And when bloom starts, it doesn't stop quickly. It continues, weeks, months. And that extended performance is what makes it such a strong mid-layer plant. It fills gaps, connects other plants, keeps the container looking active even when others pause. Number 3, agapanthus. Now we step into something more architectural. Agapanthus doesn't behave like most perennials. It builds slowly, then delivers something dramatic. Tall stems, rounded flower heads, clean, structured shapes that rise above everything else in the container. But here's the detail that changes how you use it. Agapanthus depends on stored energy. Its thick roots act like reserves, and those reserves build over time, which is why April planting is critical. It gives the plant an entire season to establish those reserves before peak performance. Plant later, and the plant focuses on survival. Plant in April, and it prepares for impact. And when it blooms, it stands above everything else, not blending in, not supporting, leading. That's what makes it a focal plant, something the entire container builds around. Number 2, Siberian iris. Now we move into precision again, but with elegance. Siberian iris isn't loud. It doesn't overwhelm with color density, but what it offers is clarity. Clean vertical lines, refined blooms, a structure that remains even after flowering ends. And that structure comes from the rhizome, the base system that spreads horizontally and produces new growth. That system develops best in cool soil, April soil, which means planting at this moment determines how many stems the plant can support later. More development now, more blooms later, and more importantly, stronger foliage after bloom. Because this plant doesn't disappear once flowering ends. It continues to define the container. Adding height, maintaining form, keeping the display from collapsing into a flat surface. And that continuity is what separates average containers from designed ones. Now pause again, because at this point, the pattern is no longer subtle. Every plant in this section does something specific. Russian sage creates atmosphere. Penstemon adds energy. Creeping phlox fills the base. Hardy geranium connects everything. Agapanthus creates a focal point. Siberian iris adds structure. Each one has a role, and none of them reach their full potential without that April window. That's what ties everything together. Not just the plants, but the timing. Now there's only one plant left, number 1. And this is where everything combines. Root strength, bloom duration, resilience, consistency. The plant that doesn't just perform well, it outperforms everything else in the container across the entire season. And once you see how it behaves when planted in April, it becomes very difficult to leave it out of any container plan. Now, everything leads here. Because up to this point, you've been stacking advantages. Better root systems, stronger structure, longer bloom periods. But number 1 isn't just another strong performer. It's the plant that ties all of those advantages together into one continuous display. Number 1, Threadleaf Coreopsis. This is where the difference between a nice container and a fully realized patio display becomes obvious. Because Threadleaf Coreopsis doesn't rely on a single moment. It doesn't peak and fade, it sustains. From late spring all the way through the hardest part of summer and into early fall. And the reason it can do that comes back to the same principle you've seen throughout this entire list: April. When planted in April, Coreopsis builds a dense, fibrous root system that spreads quickly through the container. Not deep, wide. And that matters, because a wide root system captures more moisture, more nutrients, and stabilizes the plant against stress. So when summer heat arrives and containers start drying faster, Coreopsis doesn't react. It continues. That's the difference. Most plants respond to stress. Coreopsis absorbs it. Now look above ground. The foliage is fine, almost thread-like, soft, light. It creates a texture that contrasts with everything else in the container. Bold plants look bolder next to it. Structured plants look sharper. And then the flowers begin. Small, daisy-like, but produced in such high numbers that individual blooms stop mattering. You don't see flowers, you see color. Continuous color. A blanket that covers the plant from late May onward. No gaps, no pauses, no need for constant maintenance. And that's where this plant separates itself completely from everything else on the list: consistency. Because most perennials give you waves, a strong bloom, then a break, then another cycle. Coreopsis removes that cycle. It holds, and when everything else in your container shifts, some plants slowing down, others fading temporarily, Coreopsis keeps the entire display alive. Now step back and look at the full picture. Dianthus gave you early compact color. Agastache built vertical energy. Veronica added structure. Blanket flower introduced intensity. Japanese painted fern brought texture. Gora created movement. Russian sage added atmosphere. Penstemon delivered spikes and color. Creeping phlox covered the base. Hardy geranium connected everything. Agapanthus created focal points. Siberian iris added elegance. And Coreopsis? It holds it all together. It's the bridge between early season and late season, the constant that keeps your patio from ever looking empty. And when it's planted in April, it starts earlier and lasts longer. That's the key, because timing doesn't just change when a plant begins. It changes how long it performs. An April-planted Coreopsis starts blooming weeks earlier than one planted in June. In those lost weeks, they don't come back. By the end of the season, the April container has produced nearly double the color. Not because the plant is different, but because the foundation was built earlier. Now here's something most gardeners overlook. Containers don't have time to recover. In the ground, plants can slowly adapt, spread roots deeper, find stability. But in containers, everything is compressed. Limited soil, faster drying, higher stress. So the plants that succeed are the ones that establish early. And April is the only time that consistently allows that. Cool soil, balanced moisture, lower evaporation. That's the window. And every plant on this list uses it in a specific way. Miss it, and you spend the season managing. Use it, and the plants carry the work for you. Now imagine your patio in midsummer again, but this time, instead of comparing two different outcomes, picture the version where everything was planted in April. The containers are full, not crowded, but complete. No exposed soil, no weak growth, no sections that feel unfinished. Every plant has a role, every layer connects. Color moves from one container to the next without interruption. Some areas dense, Some lighter, some structured, some moving, but all of it working together. That's what a finished patio looks like, not just planted, but composed. And the difference didn't come from spending more or choosing rare plants. It came from using the right plants at the right time. So now the question becomes simple. What are your containers doing right now? Are they already planted or are they waiting? Because the April window doesn't stay open long. Every week the soil warms, root growth slows, stress increases, and the advantage gets smaller. But if you act now, even with just a few containers, the difference will be obvious within weeks. Stronger growth, faster fill, earlier blooms, and by summer, a patio that looks like it was designed, not assembled. Drop a comment and tell me which of these 13 perennials you're adding first, and more importantly, which container you're planting this week, because that one decision is what separates a patio that struggles from one that explodes with color. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.